Hey guys, I'm Georgia and welcome back to my channel for another video all about books. Well, I'm going to recommend today 10 psychological thriller / sort of crime fiction books that you should read. I think it was around this time last year that I did a very similar video to this and you guys loved it. It's one of my most viewed book videos ever and I got loads of requests for another one, so here we go. Your wish is my command. Is that a saying? That sounds wrong. Yeah, I think that's right. I read so many books in this genre. I love a mystery. I love solving a case or a story along with the characters. I love seeing how everything comes together and I just always read them so quickly. I devour this genre. I just love a book that makes me want to stay up until 3 AM reading. This is without a doubt my most read genre, so you better believe I have many more to recommend. Although I don't actually have a single one of these books to physically show you because I had to do a huge clear out of my books when I moved out of my last flat into this one. This flat is very small, my office is tiny. And I do also tend to read most of this genre on my Kindle. I think mostly because once you know the ending of a mystery, you're rarely going to feel inclined to read it again. And I reserve like paperback book buying for books I might want to dip into again. Maybe that'll change once I move into a house that actually has space to move in and space for a proper bookshelf, but for now, that's kind of what I go for. Also, I do have Kindle Unlimited. I love my Kindle. My Kindle is like my favourite thing in the world. I know that's very controversial in like book YouTube and book TikTok, but I love my Kindle. And I pay $7.99 a month, $6.99 a month? Can't remember, for Kindle Unlimited. And Kindle Unlimited have so many books you can download for free and you can read, and they have loads of this kind of genre, which is great for me. It works out really well. But anyway, enough of my rambling, let's get into the video and let's start with a book that I am shocked I didn't think to mention in my original video last year. I had to check like 3 times that I didn't mention this and I didn't, and I don't know why. But that is After the Crash by Michael Bussey. I think I'm going to post it here. I'll put a thing here. I first read this book years ago, probably around 2016, and it's still one I think about all the time. I recommend it to other people whenever they say they want something with a really good twist. The premise of this book is just amazing. It's in 1980, a plane crashes into the Franco-Swiss border and every single passenger was killed instantly, apart from a 3-month-old baby girl who miraculously survives, and nobody knows who she really belongs to. There were 2 different families aboard the flight who had a 3-month-old girl, and the extended families are both claiming that she belongs to them. One of the families is a poor working class family, the other are rich beyond what you can even dream of, and after a very lengthy legal battle, the judge decides which family is to raise her, choosing the working class Vitrol family. However, the grandmother of the very powerful and rich DeCarville family hires a private investigator to find out the truth. After 18 years of investigating, this private investigator has to admit it's a dead end, he can't go on, this case has broken him, and he actually ends up committing suicide. This story is sort of told through the PI's journal entries, jumping between the past with the journal entries and the present day with the 18-year-old girl now. There's loads of different viewpoints in the story, sort of jumps between all the different characters, who are all so well written, by the way. Like, I find that a lot of the time with books that have loads of different sort of character point of views, all the characters sort of become a bit 2D because there's not enough time to fully like layer them up. But somehow Michael Bussey manages to create these fully 3D, deeply layered, I was about to say families, deeply layered characters. I actually read this a couple of times and I do think if you pay enough attention to the right things in the story, it does tell you the answer like multiple times, but you don't really realise until you know what that answer is. I just think this story is so cleverly written. It's got so many different layers and twists and turns and red herrings to keep you guessing. I actually didn't realise when I first read this, but this book is translated into English from French, and it is so well done you wouldn't have a clue. I find quite often with translated fiction that you can usually tell it's been translated, like there are a few things that slip through. You cannot tell at all in this. And with such an intricate mystery, that is no mean feat. So well done to Michael Bussey in the first place for writing such a good book, but also the translator did such a good job. I just realised that the angle of this camera is quite high up and I'm just sort of slowly sinking down into my chair as I talk, but I'm not going to move it because then I have to change my whole setup and I'm not doing that, so hopefully it's alright. Next up, let's go for one that I actually read very recently thanks to my wonderful Kindle Unlimited subscription, and that's Playdate by Alex Dahl. I'd never heard of this book before, I'd never heard of the author, but I'm so glad I decided to download it because this was just such a thrilling read. It was really the cover that drew me in here. This is the story of the Blix family whose 7-year-old daughter Lucia is kidnapped after her mother Elisa lets her go for a play date at her new school friend's house. Elisa meets the friends Josie and Josie's mother Lane. She goes around to the house, drops off Lucia's stuff. Everything seems perfectly normal until Lucia, Josie and Lane all just disappear completely. The book is set in Norway and the Norwegian police simply aren't equipped to deal with cases of such magnitude like this one, and there are rumours of Eastern European child trafficking networks, murder, abuse and everything in between. But as the reader, you actually know what's going on throughout the entirety of this book, or pretty much the entirety of the book. You're not kept in the dark here. The book is told from multiple perspectives again, with each chapter being told from a different character's point of view, including Lucia's and the kidnappers. And you really get to look in the mind of the kidnapper, why she did what she did. And it's almost frustrating when you go back to Elisa's chapters because she just wants her daughter back and you as the reader know exactly where she is and where she needs to look. But there's sort of this ongoing narrative of Elisa having this big secret that she refuses to share. So you sort of go through the book knowing that you know what happened to Lucia, but also you don't know what the secret is, and it's like tantalising. And it's a bit of a mindfuck as well because you start to feel sorry for the kidnapper as you get to know her story, like why she did what she did. And for such a dark book, I found myself getting quite emotional with this one at times. It's really weird. There's also a really random addition. This is like my only nitpicky thing about the book. There's this addition of a journalist narrator who alludes to having this sort of sixth sense secret power with solving cases, which I don't really think was necessary to the story. It felt a bit out of place to me, but it didn't sort of take away from the whole book as a whole. The whole book as a whole, that's really good English. I think you could take her chapters out and the book would still be exactly the same. All in all, I love this book. I devoured it within a couple of days. Highly recommend. The third book I want to talk about, I actually really debated whether I should include it in this video or not, because there's no denying that it is a thriller / mystery book, but it's aimed towards a younger audience. But this is the book that actually made me fall in love with this genre, and that's Girl Missing by Sophie Mackenzie. I must have first read this book when I was like 12, 13 years old, and it's always stuck with me. Like, it's so ingrained in my psyche that sometimes I think about the story of this as if it was a real crime and I sort of find myself thinking about it. And then I remember that it's fictional, this was a book, it's not like a real crime that happened. So this is the story of a girl called Lauren who's always known that she was adopted, but one day she finds out that the truth might be a lot darker. She comes across a missing baby online who has remarkably similar characteristics to herself. And she has a lot of questions about this, like, is this baby really her? Why was she taken? Are her adoptive parents involved? And how could she find her biological parents? Lauren lives in London with her adoptive parents, but runs away to the USA to get answers. And sort of as the story unfolds, Lauren's memories of a past life start to come back to her. Lauren is just 14 in this book, and for a 14-year-old it's all completely unrealistic, but like, it is a book. When I read this, I was younger than 14 and I thought she was so brave and mature, this older teenager going off to America alone, but now as a 27-year-old I can look back and say that's clearly crazy. I haven't reread this as an adult, so I can't tell you if I'd still love the book now as much as I did then, but I don't really want to reread it because I don't want to ruin the good memories I have of this book. I have no doubt though that if you're a young teen or know of a young bookworm looking for a gripping book, then this would absolutely be a fantastic read, a fantastic gift for someone of that age group. It is such a good book, it has such like a special place in my heart. In case I haven't spoken about this series enough recently, I want to recommend the DCI Kept series by Alex Smith. There are currently 7 books in this series and I've read the first 4, so Paper Girls, Bad Dog, 3 Little Pigs and Whip Crack, and I do fully intend to read the rest as soon as I can. I've actually started the next one, which is Run Rabbit Run. Again, they are all available on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have it, I highly recommend downloading these. This is your very typical crime procedural type novel series, mostly set in Norfolk here in England. I really love a thriller that's set in the UK, as I can really like imagine the settings and delve right in. It always seems a bit more high stakes to me, which is ridiculous, but it is what it is. Like, I relate to it more than if it's like based in America. These books focus around a man called Robert Kett, a DCI with the Norfolk Police, who has this extraordinary ability to find missing people. He just acts on impulse with little thoughts as to the effects of his actions, but it always comes through for him, or pretty much always comes through for him. It is so rare that I find a crime procedural series I can really sink my teeth into like this one, where I read every book in order rather than just picking and choosing the ones that sound interesting. 4.5 books into this series, I suppose, and I'm still not bored of the stories or the characters, who are all so well written. Like, I love all of the characters in this. They're all just such believable, real people, if you know what I mean. Like, these are actually people who could exist in real life. The first book is about the disappearance of 3 paper girls in Norwich and the lengths that Kett will go to find them. He sort of throws himself into his job in an effort to forget about the horror of his home life. And it really is horror, because his wife Billy was abducted randomly off the street months beforehand and no one knows why. And Kett's been left to raise his 3 daughters alone. But also his whole job is solving mysteries, so why can't he solve the mystery of his own wife? Obviously, as the story progresses throughout the series, you learn more about what happened and why, but it never really gets boring. The series as a whole isn't too dark either. The 3rd book is probably the darkest, but it has a nice amount of humour throughout to sort of even this out. I just love this series. I'm really sad that I've only got 3 books left of it. I hope there's going to be more, but yeah, they're just quick, easy reads. I really like them. Good Samaritans by Will Carver is next on this list. I actually came across this book because someone I know knew the author, I think, and I was very curious, and I'm very glad I was curious because this story was fantastic. So this is the story of Seth Bowman, who is desperate for human connection. So much so that he spends every single night calling random names in the phone book just to have someone to talk to. One night, Seth happens to call Hadley Surf, a woman who was on the brink of suicide. At the exact moment Seth calls her, Hadley's just finished dialing the number for the Samaritans, and so she thinks she's talking to them. A connection is forged between these 2 strangers, and soon they're meeting up. But all is not as it seems, of course. Alongside Seth and Hadley, you also have the narratives of Ant, a Samaritan worker, and Detective Sergeant Pace, who is trying to piece together the mystery of a number of bodies recently found wrapped in plastic and bleached. But how do all these stories fit together? Like, what's the connection? I don't think I've ever read another book quite like this one. Will Carver just writes suspense so well. Every single page in this book has you gripped, just waiting for the next twist. It's so creepy and dark and provocative, and it really doesn't shy away from its graphic descriptions of both sex and crime. I've never heard anyone else talk about this book before, so if I can spread the word about any book in the video, it's this one. It is so good. Whilst we're on the topic of very dark books, let's talk next about the Spillingcid series by Sophie Hannah, of which I have not read every book in the series. I think there's 10 of them in total, but I have read about 5 of them. I find that this is one of those series in which you don't need to have read every book to have an idea of what's going on. You can just kind of dip in and dip out, And honestly, I just buy these books as and when I see them popping up in my local book charity shop. If you love a bit of sort of psychological suspense to the point where it's actually quite frustrating, then this is the series for you. That really sells it, doesn't it? Like, do you want to be frustrated by your book? This is what you want. I find that every book in this series has these really complex plots, and it can sometimes take a while to get all the story and the characters straight in your head, but once you do, you'll find yourself speeding through to the finish because you just have to know how it ends. I suppose I'll give you a synopsis of the first book in the series to lure you in here, which is called Little Face. So Little Face is about a woman who leaves her 2-week-old daughter at home with her husband when she has to pop out. But when she returns, she is convinced that this baby in the cot is not hers, whilst her husband insists that it is. The police are called, but of course nobody believes her that this isn't her kid, and they just brush it off as postpartum depression. How can Alice, the mum, prove that her baby's been taken if it really has been? Are you intrigued? Because you should be. Most of the books in this series have storylines as enticing as that one, all just as psychologically challenging for sure. They're so good. They do get quite dark, quite deep. If you want something more lighthearted, then this isn't one for you. But then again, if you want something lighthearted, you probably won't be watching this video. I might as well talk next about the last series of books I want to mention in this video, and that's the Jessica Shaw series by Lisa Gray. So there are only 3 books in the series: Thin Air, Bad Memory and Dark Highway, and all 3 are fantastic. These follow the career of Jessica Shaw, a private investigator who's worked on some incredibly dark cases, but finally she must face the dark case of her own life after she receives this anonymous tip in the form of a photograph of a 3-year-old girl who was kidnapped years ago. But the photo is of herself, of course. Jessica has to delve into her own past to find out who she really is, who murdered her mother, and whether she can still get justice. At least that's the plot of the first book. The second 2 in the series are following other cases that Jessica's solving as a PI, and honestly the second one is probably my favourite. This is about a woman who's on death row after confessing to murder, but she can't actually remember if she did it or not. All 3 of these books are told in a similar way, again through multiple different plots and character point of views, none of which seem to connect in the early chapters, but eventually they do all begin to weave together. A lot of books try to do this sort of like multiple character point of view things, but I find it takes a really good writer to actually make it work and like weave it all together so seamlessly. And it turns out that Lisa Gray is a really good writer. These are all super quick reads. They have that sort of element of psychological crime thriller, but they're not too terrifying or too contrived. If you're a beginner to the genre, then I reckon these could be a really good place to start. The next book seems to be doing the rounds at the moment, so I'm sure a lot of you have already heard about it, but this is The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. I literally read this entire book in one day, I think in the first lockdown last year, and I couldn't put it down, and I've recommended it to so many of my friends. This is the story of a woman called Libby, who on her 25th birthday gets to open a letter that's been held in a trust for her since she was a baby. Libby has always known that she was adopted, but through this letter she finds out more about her past, how at just 10 months old she was found perfectly healthy at the scene of what seemed to investigators to be a cult-motivated suicide. And it also turns out that she's been left her birth family's home, which is a multi-million-pound mansion in Chelsea in London. So obviously Libby wants to find out about her past, who were her family and what on earth happened. As well as Libby throughout this book, we also have the narrative of Henry, a child who sort of grew up in the mansion telling his story but like in the past, and Lucy, a single mum of 2 who is homeless in France, desperately trying to care for her family. When Lucy receives a random notification saying the baby is now 25, she has to immediately find her way back to London. Obviously, as the reader, you know that all 3 of these characters must be connected in some way, you just don't know how, and a big part of the book is sort of you trying to piece that together. This book is almost frustratingly slow burn, nothing really happens till about halfway in, but then it all starts to come together really quickly and there's zero chances of putting it down. So if you're like struggling with this, fight through to the halfway mark and then it's amazing, which you might not want to do that, but I think it's worth to finish. The chapters in this are quite short though, so it's quite fast to get through. It doesn't feel like much of a slog to read. Saying all of this has actually reminded me how much I love this book, and I'd really be interested in reading some more stuff by Lisa Jewell. So if anybody has any suggestions, then I am all ears. And lastly, we have what I think might have been my favourite book out of all of the ones I've mentioned today, and that's 13 by Steve Kavanagh. Since reading this book, I have found out that it's actually part of the Eddie Flynn series, of which I think there are 6 books, but I've only read 13, which is the 4th in the series, and you absolutely don't have to have read the rest of the books in the series to understand what's going on in this one. Like, it's a great standalone. I will definitely be reading the rest though in this series eventually, because this one was so good. So this is a crime thriller with a twist, as the main protagonist, Eddie Flynn, is a former con artist turned lawyer. So there's a lot of like courtroom drama. Usually I have no interest whatsoever in law focused books. I find all the courtroom stuff can get pretty tedious, but absolutely not in this book. The narrative in this book is split between Eddie, who's a lawyer on what the media is calling the celebrity trial of the century, and somebody called Kane. You know from the get-go that Kane is a serial killer. He is the bad guy that everyone's looking for, or should be looking for, throughout the book. You as the reader know what's going on to an extent, but you don't know exactly who Kane is and why he's doing what he's doing. I mean, the tagline of this book is the serial killer isn't on trial, he's on the jury, so you kind of know what you're expecting before you even open the book. This killer is so manipulative that he managed to get on the jury for his own crime, for which a well-known celebrity has been accused. Kane is just such a mindfuck of a character. He's so calculating and lacking remorse, and it's so interesting getting a look into the mind of a killer and seeing the justifications for the actions. Of course, this is fiction, it's not real, but you don't often find the killer's point of views in books, especially as well written as this one is. You do forget that it's fiction. The premise of this book is insane and you do have to suspend belief at some points, but as I said, it's fiction. The story is just so well crafted, it all weaves together so well, it's so clever. Everyone should read this book. And there you have it, 10 psychological thrillers slash crime fiction slash police procedural kind of books. I find they all sort of like merge together. They're all one and the same pretty much. They all have the same sort of mystery solving element, which I love so much. If you know of any other books that based on my recommendations here that you think I might like, then please, I'm all ears, put them in the comments down below. You can go and follow me on Goodreads, where I try to stay updated on everything I'm reading. I'm doing really good on my book challenge for this year. My challenge was 30 books in 2021, and I'm 2 books ahead of schedule. I think I've already read like 21, 20, 22, somewhere around there. Like, I'm doing really good. I'm really proud of myself. Yeah, I think that's everything. Oh, you can go watch my last video from last year if you want to see more recommendations just like these ones. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.